Do you know, I love that song, Happy Day, don't you? I've not quite broken out my dancing shoes yet, but I'm glad to see that some of you were dancing in the aisles there. I hope you've been enjoying the series so far in Mark's Gospel. For those of you who've been journeying with us over the last few weeks, the goal is really to present Jesus clearly and help us to follow him more nearly. That is really the whole objective of going through Mark's Gospel. We want to understand who he is. Who is this Jesus that we get to follow, and how does following him impact every part of our life? We are going to be in chapter 8 this morning. I'm not going to preach the whole chapter. I'm going to be preaching from verse 22 onwards, but I want to fill in some of the gaps in the early parts. So this story through Mark and the disciples has illustrated that they are on a bit of an adventure in missing the point. There are so many times in this gospel where they just don't get it. Have you ever felt like you just don't get it? Or have you ever felt like you've been misunderstood by somebody or something or I'm not going to tell any indications about my relationship with my wife, Rachel, because there are many in which I can report and we'd be here all day. However, I do want to tell you about a lady called Brenda in a church that I pastored in Selly Oak. Now, Brenda is now with the Lord, and I was fairly, I suppose I was probably in ministry. I'd been in ministry for about 8 years, and I'd learnt one or two things, but I'd still got much to learn. And Brenda, bless her, she was a beautiful lady who had experienced the grace of God. She'd experienced so much in her life, and she was a key part of the church, really. She was just brilliant. However, Brenda kind of had a bit of a misunderstanding about who I was and my kind of personality. She felt that I was a little bit far off and aloof. I know, right? She felt like, I hope no, not looking at anybody. Right, so she felt that I was just a little bit distant and not really interested in people, which is far, far from the truth. However, the assumption led to this misunderstanding that resulted in a really difficult but helpful conversation. You see, one morning, Brenda, she brought into church the shofar. I don't know whether I pronounce it right. It's this trumpet type thing, Jewish instrument, and she blew on it at the back of the church. From the back of the church, I'm at the front in praise and worship, and I nearly had a heart attack. Like, this thing just goes off, and she thought it was okay and acceptable. We had a difference of opinion, which is maybe why she thought I was far off and aloof. However, what did happen as a result of that is that we did have a conversation. I did say, Brenda, that can't happen. All right, I've got to think of people with heart conditions. But we sat down and we had this conversation. She relayed some of the feelings that she had towards me, and it was hard to hear because I felt really misunderstood. And when you feel misunderstood, you can kind of want to go on the defensive, can't you? Yeah, I want to justify action. So I had to listen and receive this criticism, and it was hard. Nobody likes criticism. However, some of the ways and the means the things that Brenda had been saying, I could see why she would misunderstand my character and my actions, because we had never had a conversation or spent too much time with one another to understand how we're wired. And so that was a pivotal moment in my relationship with Brenda, in which she never blew the shofar again, but she actually became one of my greatest supporters. She was just brilliant, and I could trust what Brenda said because she had the guts to come and have a conversation with me about how she perceived who I am. So misunderstandings can be hard and difficult, but if they're never resolved, then they just continue with misunderstandings and assumptions. Now, the disciples repeatedly have these adventures of missing the point. See, they've misunderstood Jesus' identity and in Mark chapter 4, and they've misunderstood the parable of the sower. They've misunderstood his teaching about what makes a person clean in Mark 7, and they're just the ones that we know are recorded about. I would imagine as Jesus journeyed with the disciples, there were many more misunderstandings that they would have had. But what Mark is trying to portray is the journey of discipleship. What is the journey that we go on? Because the reality of it is we all come to a point of faith and belief with some level of misunderstanding. It's not always particularly clear, is it, about who Jesus is? Please don't leave me hanging. That is true, I think, for all of us at some point as we journey through faith. Who is this Jesus? Who is he really? So this whole journey, Mark is portraying the disciples in a way that I think is really helpful to us as we begin to grapple with what a journey of discipleship looks like. So shall we read from Mark chapter 8, verse 22. They came to Bethsaida. They brought a blind man to him and begged him to touch him. He took the blind man by the hand and brought him out of the village. Spitting on his eyes and laying his hands on him, he asked him, Do you see anything? He looked up and said, I see people. They look like trees walking. Again, Jesus placed his hands on the man's eyes. The man looked intently, and his sight was restored, and he saw everything clearly. Then he sent him home, saying, Don't even go into the village. Jesus went out with his disciples to the village of Caesarea Philippi. And on the road, he asked his disciples, Who do people say that I am? They answered him, John the Baptist, others Elijah, still others one of the prophets. But you, he asked them, Who do you say that I am? Peter answered him, You are the Messiah. And he strictly warned them not to tell anyone about him. Then he began to teach them what was necessary for the Son of Man to suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, chief priests, and the scribes, be killed and rise after 3 days. He spoke openly about this. Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. Another misunderstanding. But turning around and looking at his disciples, he rebuked Peter and said, Get behind me, Satan. You are not thinking about God's concerns, but about human concerns. Calling the crowd along with his disciples, he said to them, If anyone wants to follow after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. For whoever wants to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life because of me and the gospel will save it. For what does it benefit someone to gain the whole world and yet lose his life? What can anyone give in exchange for his life? For whoever is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, the Son of Man will also be ashamed of him when he comes in the glory of his Father with the holy angels. So the discipleship journey. Just prior to this, Jesus had been in another moment where he'd fed the masses. So if you look at the beginning of chapter 8, you'll see that he'd fed 4,000 people. And there's some similarities, but there's enough distinction to recognize that these are two different moments. He then had this conversation, this interaction with the Pharisees about their teaching, and he'd been talking with the disciples about their teaching and their misunderstanding about what the leaven was actually all about. And then we land into this point, the passage that I've just read with the blind man at Bethsaida. This is an acted parable. Now, the blind man is representative of no understanding. So at this point, some commentators and the text would indicate that what Mark is trying to get across is there is a point where we have absolutely no understanding. Spiritual blindness. This isn't about physical blindness. This is about telling a spiritual reality through physical action, an acted parable. So the blind man is representative of spiritual blindness and not understanding the reality of who Jesus is and the reality of our lives. I'm assuming that many of us in this room at some point would identify, yes, we were blind. We had no understanding about who Jesus was, who Jesus is, and why he matters. Would that be fair? Yes. Good, because that means we're in a place of honesty. Because actually, this is really important. When we're not honest about who we are. Now, this man realized and recognized he was blind. He couldn't get to Jesus on his own. So what does it say? It says that the disciples within Bethsaida, they brought a blind man. Now, the they is a little bit unclear, But we can assume or presume that it was his friends who brought this man to Jesus. And they begged him to touch him. So somebody somewhere had recognized Jesus and his power and his authority, and they thought, well, let's take this man to Jesus because he can do something about it. See, because the blind man couldn't get to Jesus on his own. He had no means of getting to Jesus because how would he know he'd got the right man? So it required somebody to take him to Jesus and present him to Jesus with faith. Now, at this point, I don't know if the blind man had any faith for what was about to happen, but his friends, the people who brought him to Jesus, clearly came with some expectation that this Jesus had authority over even blindness, which, by the way, there is only recordings of anybody being healed of blindness are by Jesus, which is a messianic, a sign of the Messiah. Only the Messiah, the Savior, can open blind eyes. So what they're saying, this Jesus, we've seen him do the miraculous. Maybe, just maybe, he can open blind eyes. Because in chapter 7, last week, Nigel talked about the ears of the deaf man being opened, which is really interesting. Because what is Mark trying to get a hold of us? Well, we're deaf and we're blind unless we come to Jesus. We remain in a lack of understanding. So this is the first part of a discipleship journey, is recognizing that actually all people outside of Jesus have no understanding. And it's not their fault because nobody's told them. How are they going to know unless we go? How am I going to understand mathematics unless my 13-year-old daughter tells me? True story. How am I going to know about how to fit a door unless I go to Andy or Dan and say, can you help me understand? Or my dad, who's now living in Cornwall, I go like, can you help me? How do I hang this door? Because I have no understanding of how to do it. Can you help me? So unless we have somebody to help us and explain who he is, how are they going to know? That's why it's really important that we understand the journey. Because the people who are out there, it's not their fault. They're spiritually blinded by the principalities and powers in the darkness of their own heart. They know no better. So for all those issues that we wrestle with and we disagree with, yes, we will disagree with it from an ethical, moral, and a biblical point of view. But how do we know we can't hold people to the same standards that we would hold as Christians if they do not know? They don't know, so they're blind. And so the point of the story is discipleship always begins with a lack or no understanding. But then it begins to shift, because in verse 23, we get a glimpse of what Jesus does. He takes hold of the man by the hand and brought him out of the village. Now, Bethsaida was a place known for its unbelief. It was a place of unbelief. So it's really interesting, isn't it, that Jesus grabs a hold of this man and takes him out of the village of unbelief into a wide open space where his eyes could be opened. So are we going to leave people in the village of unbelief, or are we going to grab them a hold by the hand, willingly, by the way, because nobody can come out of the village of unbelief without their willingness. If they're unwilling, they'll stay in the village of unbelief, and that's not on us, that's on them. But for those who are willing to be led to Jesus, may we grab them by the hand and take them to a place of encounter with Jesus where no understanding can lead to a place of misunderstanding, because we always go through the point of misunderstanding. Like, we've got to help people grapple with the reality, because some people will just misunderstand, just like you and I. We all misunderstand. It's part of the process. Like, so when my 13-year-old daughter's trying to explain to me some mathematics and I just don't get it and she keeps telling me, there's a misunderstanding, but there's a point where understanding will come. We've got to misunderstand something in order to learn. If we miss out this point, and we have expectations that are above and beyond where they currently are, then we're not really going to be that helpful to people on the journey of faith. So Jesus takes him out of the village of unbelief into an open space. And he does something really strange. He spits, puts his hand. I mean, I'm not sure I'm up for that. But there's something communicated to this man that actually there's a belief that there's some healing properties in spit. So Jesus does this, but he puts his hands upon him. He touched him. And he says, do you see anything? What do you see? Now, the man could have said, I know, I've heard about Jesus. I know he's a miracle worker, so I'm going to have to say that I see something. Because what's he going to think? So what would have happened if he said, oh yeah, Jesus, I see really, really clearly. I'm not really sure but I see. No, it wouldn't have fooled Jesus. But there's something about the man's honesty that says, yeah, I know what? I see a little bit. I see a little bit fuzzy. I see people walking around like trees. Like, sees a partial truth, but not the full truth, not the full reality of what he's about to experience. And this man then begins to look intently at Jesus. I love that. That sense of expectation and like intentionality. I'm looking at Jesus, and what happens? Jesus takes, this is the 2-stage miracle. But isn't that the point of our walk with Jesus? We don't come into full understanding straight away. We go through the process of misunderstanding to a point of clarity when we're touched by Jesus. Jesus touched him. Touch communicates something really powerful, doesn't it? In appropriate ways, and really powerful. So Jesus touched this man, laid his hands upon him. A man who would have been seen as isolated and less than. This man his humanity wouldn't have been recognized as fully established. He would have been less than. Jesus, holy rabbi, Son of God, touching what is unholy. There's something that I think Jesus wants to communicate in that his holiness cannot be contaminated by what we would determine unholy. But his holiness transforms that which is unholy to that which is sanctified, pure, and holy before him. That applies to you and me as much as it does the man in our story. Do you see anything? Well, I see a little bit. The greatest thing that we can do on our journey of discipleship is be honest about where we are. Because if we're not honest about where we are and we think we're more mature than we actually are, then we'll do ourselves a disservice and we'll do others a disservice because we'll be speaking out of a lack of knowledge. And we'll potentially be like the yeast of the Pharisees that lead people astray. But when we go, actually, no, do you know what? I am no longer in a place of no understanding. I'm into this place of maybe misunderstanding, but I'm getting captivated by Jesus, and you're growing and you're learning all the time, then we begin to move that little bit more because we're always coming from a place of honesty. So if we can rightly reflect about where we are in the journey, it'll do us so much better for the next stage and season of growth, of transformation, of seeing that little bit more clearly. Are you with me so far? So Jesus touches his eyes, and this man looks intently at him, and he goes into the next thing of understanding. We're going to look at verses 25 to 33 in this point. But the first thing that this man saw as he came out of this cloudy vision was Jesus. I don't know about you, but I just find that quite a compelling and beautiful thing. That the first thing that happens to this man, having been in a village of unbelief, with no understanding, into a place of seeing, not seeing very clearly, but coming into this now place of understanding, the first thing wasn't what he had to do, Wasn't the rules of the Pharisees, the teaching of the Pharisees. No, the first thing that he saw, the first person he saw, was Jesus. See, the point of discipleship is not to get us busy doing lots of things and lots of activity, or necessarily even believing the right thing in the first instance. The point of discipleship is lead us to a place where we see Jesus clearly and we begin to be captivated by him, and our life begins to turn around because we follow the way of Jesus. The teaching of Jesus, the life of Jesus, the hope of Jesus, because we see him clearly. It's not that we understand every point of doctrine clearly. You see, I think if we see Jesus clearly, we can begin to unlearn the points of doctrine that are really important to our faith. But it's Jesus saves, not correct theology. I've known many people who have correct theology, but they're horrible. I certainly wouldn't want to have a cup of coffee with them. They're just horrible. Because right theology doesn't change your character. Only Jesus does that. Only Jesus takes you from a place of not understanding to a place of understanding. It's only Jesus. And so when we focus upon him, he will begin to bring everything into focus and into sight. So might I suggest that actually we embrace the journey of misunderstanding, because I think it will help us grow. Now the danger is, if you just misunderstand on your own, in isolation, then that's a very dangerous place to be. Because who's going to be around to help you and guide you? Because we've had many people who would come up with great ideas off their own back, and they're in the land of misunderstanding, and they've gone into the place of dangerous teaching that leads people astray. So we need community. So in this place of misunderstanding, because actually we do come through to understanding, but the reality of it is we will always loop back to moments that we don't understand something. If we don't, I might suggest that we're not growing and we're not learning. And it's a dangerous place to be. But when Jesus is with you and we're in the safe space of a community that are pursuing the same thing, it means that when correction comes, don't get up the huff. Like if somebody comes along and says, you know what, I've just noticed something, I've heard something in your, when you were in your Connect group, you said something that I'm just not sure lines up with the character and the person of Jesus. Like, please don't be offended. Because I'm hoping that the person who's saying, I just don't get that, is coming because they want your best, not to pull you down. They want you to help you avoid error, to help you to lead to a place of understanding more about who Jesus is and what it means to follow him. Are you with me? Right, so that's why I think Connect groups are really important. Not just because they're a place where you can learn and do life together, but I think Connect groups are really important because they're a fundamental part of our discipleship. I'm not entirely sure that we can grow to the full capacity that Jesus has purposed for us outside of relationship one with another. Because I think we can end up continuing in that cycle of misunderstanding. But the point is always to lead through to understanding. Now, if you're not in a Connect group, I'd love to help you get connected with a Connect group. Or if you're not in a Connect group, I'd love to know why. And I mean that genuinely. I want to learn. I want to understand what some of the reservations might be, why it's difficult. There might be some logistics behind that. I get all of that. So please, I just want to know so that we can better understand where we're at. Is that okay? Cool. So the point of the active parable is really to lead into what happens next. So Peter, you've got to love Peter, haven't you? Like, I find so much encouragement in Peter because he says something and he means well, but he just misses the point. And so Jesus asks them this question. He says, well, okay, so who do you say I am? Who am I? Well, they go, some people say, well, I've heard it said. Godfrey said that you're just a prophet. just a teacher. But Jesus says, yeah, but I'm not bothered about what Godfrey said. Doesn't, you leave Godfrey to me. Who do you say that I am? So if you've been in a place of no belief and into a place of misunderstanding and somebody's helping you lead towards Jesus, like the question is going to come. Who do you say Jesus is? Is he just your buddy who kind of is there when you need him? Is he just there to placate your needs and your wants, to give you the best life this side of eternity? If that's the Jesus that you're following, I might suggest that there's some misunderstanding that we need to help you with. Because that's not the Jesus. You see, Peter's response, you are the Messiah, was correct in many senses. But what follows gives us an understanding of what was in Peter's mind and heart. He still misunderstood. So he said the right thing, but his next action demonstrated he'd misunderstood who Jesus is. The Messiah. There was this hope that the Messiah would come and rescue the people from Roman rule and liberate them, that he would be king and establish the kingdom of God once again. Peter, I think, had that in mind. So he goes on, and this is, again, you've got to love Jesus the way that he doesn't pull any punches. Then he began to teach them that this was necessary for the Son of Man to suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, chief priests, and scribes, and he be killed and rise after 3 days. He spoke openly about this. Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. Now, I'd have loved to have been there. Wouldn't you? It's like, just, Jesus, I know what you say, but just come on, can we have a little word, please? Because, Jesus, I don't think you're quite right. That's not what Messiah is going to do. No, the Messiah is going to get rid of these Romans and he's going to establish, that's in his mind. He had a king mindset, whereas Jesus had a different mindset about what the Messiah had come to do in the first instance. He said the Son of Man came to suffer many things and be rejected, to be misunderstood. So Jesus turns around and looking at his disciples. That's interesting, isn't it? So Jesus is having this conversation with Peter, and then he turns around to his disciples, and then he says, "Get behind me, Satan. You are not thinking about God's concerns, but about human concerns." Peter, the spokesperson for the apostles, this community group thing, Jesus, you're the Messiah. But this is the kind of Messiah that we think you are. And Jesus says, I'm not the kind of Messiah that you think I am. My Messiahship, my reign, who I am will begin with suffering and pain and death and rejection. They couldn't get their head around this Jesus. But this is a really important moment because it marks a shift in their understanding. Because prior to that, they'd not understood. So let's take this as a win. Let's take this as a win in the passage. So the question I have for you is, the people that you're having conversations with about faith, have they moved from one degree of unbelief to belief? Because the continuum of what happens in this moment is it's not like sudden revelation, I get it. What Mark is trying to communicate is our journey of faith is from unbelief to belief. Now, yes, there will come a moment when we say, Jesus, I recognize that you paid the price on the cross for my sin and my wrongdoing. And I accept that it was my sin that put you there. But I also recognize that in your resurrection, you rose again so that I might have new life. Life eternal, life fully and forever, life free. There comes that moment of recognition where we see clearly who Jesus is. But then we go on this continuum of moving from unbelief to belief, because let me tell you, and the more I've walked with Jesus, the more I recognize there have been areas of unbelief in me that have had to die. But don't be concerned by that, because the more we recognize those areas in our own life, the more we set ourselves up for a growth in more understanding about who Jesus is. Now, as we walk with him, we can rest secure that actually our life, our eternity, our hope is in Jesus alone. Having put our trust in him, he holds us and he has us. And that's why I think we can go on this journey with him throughout the course of our days, setting our direction to walk with Jesus. So, from no understanding to misunderstanding to understanding to action. Like we can't just know some stuff, because knowledge doesn't save in and of itself. That Jesus then invites them to participate, to walk, to follow, to make some decisions and choices that will shape their whole life around the way of Jesus. So the key, I think, to understanding these verses are what are found in the words of Jesus to the disciples. You are not thinking about God's concerns, but about human concerns. You see, what begins to happen when we walk with Jesus, we begin to be less concerned about the things of the world, and we begin to be more captivated by the things of the kingdom. Doesn't mean to say that we don't live in the world. Absolutely we do. Some of you will go out and you'll enjoy the beach, hopefully, this afternoon if the weather's nice enough. Or you'll go and maybe have a meal out with friends, and you'll spend some of your finances on those sort of things, and you'll enjoy cycling and riding and running and all the kind of stuff that actually takes some finance, but it's also stuff that everybody does. Isn't it? That's not common just to people. That's stuff across. They're things. The things of the world are the desires and the hearts that we can focus upon. Jesus is saying, if you want to come after me, then there needs to be a shift of alignment from what you want to do. Okay. Now, if I was being spiritual,
okay, yeah. There we go. Okay, there's a shift from saying, Jesus, I want you to do what I want you to do, to Jesus, I will do what you've called me to do. I'll live the way that you've called me to live. I'll put you first. I'll prioritize the things of your way. So he gives some indication, doesn't he? He says, if you want to follow after me, deny himself, take up his cross and follow me. There's some sacrifice involved. There's some giving over of the old life. They're putting that aside to pick up the new life that we have in Jesus. It says, whoever wants to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life because of me and the gospel will save it. It's not just like deny for the sake of it because somehow you think you're going to be saved. No, it's put that stuff aside for Jesus and his kingdom, for the sake of the good news of his life at work in and through you. For who can give. So for what does it benefit someone to gain the whole world and yet lose his life? What can anyone give in exchange for his life? For whoever is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, the Son of Man will be ashamed of him when he comes in the glory of his Father with the holy angels. I think this whole passage is indicating this trajectory of discipleship towards loyalty to Jesus above everything else. This is where it begins to shift for the disciples. This chapter marks a change where Jesus more intentionally begins to prepare the disciples for that which is to come, both in his death and resurrection, but also the life after, when he's ascended to be with the Father and the mission that he's called them into. So the life of following Jesus, I think, is a little bit like that. We move from that place of no understanding into misunderstanding to understanding to action, back into a place of sometimes misunderstanding into understanding and then back into action. You see, discipleship requires action. Discipleship requires us to make some choices and changes to our life, not for any other reason than to respond to the way of Jesus and the call of Jesus to experience the fullness of life available in Jesus. You see, so by clinging on to things of this world, we're in danger of missing out on the true life that Jesus has called us into. But by putting those things in the right place, we are invited to pick up the life that is only available in Jesus. A life that is beyond the here and the now, the things that we see and experience right in this moment. That's why, in the current climate, the world is crazy, right? Absolutely bonkers what's going on in this moment. And I know there's lots of different thoughts and ideas. All I'm praying is Jesus come back soon. I don't know when, but it does make you go, Lord, come. Come and establish your rule and your reign. Now, he might come tomorrow. He might come in 10 years, 15 years, 100 years, who knows? The crux of the matter is not about when, it's but how prepared are we in our waiting. How focused are we in our waiting? How hope-filled are we in our waiting? Because there's a lot of people out in your workplaces, in your colleges, in your schools, in your neighborhoods who will be anxious about what's going on. The impact upon the economy, the impact upon world politics, all of that kind of stuff. They'll be concerned about it. Doesn't mean to say we are ignorant of it. It just means that we have a different perspective. Because our life is not tied up with the here and the now. Our life is caught up with the one who reigns over all. So what does it mean for you? So where are you on your discipleship journey? Have you seen Jesus clearly? Are you letting him to keep leading you into places of freedom? Are you in danger of going back into the village of unbelief? Jesus said to the blind man, don't go back to the village. Go home. Go home and effectively go and tell people what I've done. Let them see it. Just don't go back to the village of unbelief. There's this beautiful little verse in Philippians chapter 3. It says, in all the striving to be like Jesus and keep pursuing Jesus, it says, just live to the place where you've already attained. Oh, so helpful. It's because it's like, you might want to go further, and great, keep going, but just don't go back. Just live to the place where you are and keep pursuing Jesus. Because he'll lead you into a place of understanding. Because this man in our story only saw because he was led to Jesus, he was touched by Jesus, and he was restored by Jesus. Jesus is our only hope. So you're letting Jesus lead you. You might want to consider a connect group, and if you do, you can chat with me after. I don't know, Mike, are you okay if people come see you? So Mike will also point you in the direction of connect group leaders and connect groups if you want to get connected in with one of those. But let Jesus lead you. And is there anything in your life that has taken a place of priority above Jesus that needs to be reordered? What is he asking you to do as a result of what you've heard this morning? Please don't let it fall, because if God has been speaking to you by his word, act upon it. Because when we act upon it, true transformation takes place. I wonder if the musicians could come back. And thanks so much for listening. I've waffled on for far too long. But if you need prayer this morning, there'll be a prayer team there's some prayer team available to come. And so come to the front around here, and they'll be able to pray with you and walk with you. Because there might be something about that place of honesty that you need to come to and say, actually, this is where I'm at. And I believe that the Lord can minister into your heart this morning in the very circumstances of your life. Maybe you just want to respond in worship and adoration. Maybe there's some things that you just identified this week that you maybe need to note down today and say, actually, on Monday, today, this afternoon, this is what I'm going to do. And then tell somebody about it. Don't keep it to yourself, but walk with others, because walking with others is a powerful tool for our growth and transformation. So Jesus, we thank you for your grace. We thank you that you're, just as we've seen so far in this gospel, your patience with your disciples. When they misunderstood things, when they had no understanding, you patiently worked with them and explained things to lead them through to a place of understanding and ultimately action. And because of their action, because of their understanding of who you are, leads to us being in this place this morning, part of your people. So Lord, would you help us in our own discipleship, but also would you give us eyes to see the people around us who are longing for more, who are open to you. And would you use us in whatever way possible to help lead them out of the village of unbelief into a wide open space where they might hear you and see you more clearly. We thank you for what you're already doing in this regard. Jesus, we ask that you'd increase it. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.